video. Okay, meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
Yeah, it's just setting up and then I'll have a link for you.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi. Who
Hello.
says that? Simon. Hello,
Yeah,
nice to see you there.
There's two Simons. I'm Simon H, and the other person is Simon P. So
Hi there.
just to be
It's
confusing.
called Anti-Capitalist Resistance.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll change mine in a sec.
Yeah.
That's all
Make
right.
it easier.
As long as we know who you are.
Yeah.
Now, Simon, if I share my slideshow now, does it interfere with what you're doing, or do we need to wait until you're going to make me the speaker?
I think we should probably wait until you're the speaker, I think, because
All right.
otherwise...
yeah, I don't know how.
Yeah, no.
I can't quite work out what you see your end.
Yeah, so we'll make you... Well, let's quickly make you co-host now.
Yeah, okay. Do I have to do anything?
Simon P, can you make Sandra co-host? Is that?
Yeah, I can. Yep.
I don't seem to have any of the options that.
That's weird, isn't it? Yeah, it doesn't matter.
You can make Sandra co-host, and then Sandra, have you ever shared your screen before on Zoom?
I have, and I had a bit of a tutorial the other day with one of the students because everything was so complicated with our Marxism conference, linking up all the cities. They had a tech team that did it for us, so I didn't have to do it.
That's good.
So I actually had to cut a lot of stuff out of my slideshow because I couldn't manage it myself. I had music and various things that were lovely, sort of created a good atmosphere.
So we're going to do Paul first, then...
No, other way around.
No,
Sandra first, that's it.
We actually
Thank you, that's
decided
it.
the other way around in the end.
So we'll do Sandra first. 15 to 20 minutes. Is that sort of okay?
20 minutes.
20, okay, all right then. Paul, 15, 20.
Give me
okay.
20.
Okay, that's fine. That's
You
fine.
can't do it right in less than 20.
That's fine. Like I've got some comrades who are very keen for speakers to try and do it in 7 minutes, and I always say it seems a bit like I mean you can't invite people to come and yeah, they should, you know, like yeah. Sort of.
Tell them if there's they can find a university course where the lectures are 7 minutes long. That'll be fantastic.
Don't give the neoliberalized universities any ideas. They might.
Exactly.
They probably adopt it as their practice.
Yeah. So this is going to be on YouTube as well, Sandra. Just so you know, so it's going to go out live.
Oh, okay. Yeah, some of our comrades asked, could they zoom in? And I said, I presume you can if you find it, but I don't know whether they will. We've all been at rallies all day, and we've got rallies every day. We've got a Tamil protest tomorrow as well. About Tamil, the genocide of the Tamils, because our government facilitates it with all their aid. And
I mean, we've got there's a big Palestine protest happening today in London, so that might impact numbers a bit, but you know, like we thought we'd go ahead anyway because you know it's taken a bit of effort to get this together, and then like at least there'll also be the YouTube video so people can.
I think that's the best idea. I am going to go on it after once our first session is over. I'm going to go because I've got to show.
You're going to go.
Yeah, there's no problem. Okay.
I thought people might do that, or some people might go and then come in late.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the fact is, it'll be on YouTube. People can watch it.
Yeah. Are you expecting it to be big in London?
Probably.
Well, what would big be these days?
Well, there was about 5,000 on Whitehall on Thursday night. I would say 15,000.
Yeah,
big, you know.
We were a little bit disappointed today, but there's an official Nakba rally next weekend, and so that's being built. So we might have more. We only had 3,000 or 4,000 today, which in Melbourne sometimes we can get 10,000 or 15,000 around the issue. But I think people are still getting over the lockdown, so I can't imagine what it must be like where you've had the virus a much worse situation than here.
Yeah, and the numbers are creeping back up, unfortunately, with the with the Indian.
I saw that Johnson's even said that they might not follow the route out of the lockdown that he was promising. Like, they're crazy, aren't they? The way they promise things they can't stick to.
Yeah, it's all getting a bit bleak. And so, like, I think it's having a big impact on people's mental health and things, you know. But I mean, yeah, it's difficult.
It would hardly be good for people's mental ill health if more and more people can't get treated in the hospitals, will it?
No, of course. I mean, like, that's the problem. It's sort of, it's,
dreadful.
You know, like, it's the public health problem of, you know, COVID itself, and, you know, and like trying to keep the numbers in hospital down, and then sort of, you know, also people feeling real fatigue and demoralization from just, you know, just how long this is all taking, I think, is right. So go on.
The trouble is, no government will prepare people or tell the truth. Like, it should have been laid out clearly from the beginning what a pandemic means, and, you know, what was likely to happen, and how and if they actually support people, like here in Australia, because they've virtually eliminated it, the government knows that if they let the virus in, they're going to lose the election. And so, you know, if anything, the government just acts in a really authoritarian way, like banning Indians coming, you know, and threatening to jail them if they get around the rules. And the trouble is, the Labor Party won't, and the media won't make the connection that the problem is they haven't built proper quarantine centres, that if they could have easily done it in the year that we've had. And they're still putting people in hotels where it just gets out all the time. Just infects the staff and people. It's just dreadful.
Okay, I'm going to start admitting people now. So Simon P, I'm going to chair both sessions. Okay, so just so you know. So yeah, let's start.
What are you going to say about me when you introduce me?
I'm matching you now, Sandra. I thought I'd match you.
That's good. Sandra, I'll use the text that we sent out about the event, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. I didn't even really read it, but that doesn't matter anyway.
Okay. Well, if I get anything wrong, then just, you know.
I'm not that bothered.
Okay.
People will judge me by what I say tonight, so.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Simon Hanna. We're going to be talking today about the Paris Commune. We're going to start in a few minutes with Paul Mason and Sandra Bloodworth giving the first session, which is going to be about the actual events of the Paris Commune 150 years ago. And then there will be a second session a bit later on in the afternoon, focusing on the revolutionary legacy of the Paris Commune for today. So the first session is going to be more historically focused, and the second session is going to be looking at kind of revolutionary strategy today. But of course, there's no brick wall between the two things. So, you know, I'm sure the conversation will overlap a little bit, and, you know, that's absolutely fine. So we're just letting people into the meeting room now, and we will start in a couple of minutes. Just let you know that today's session will be live streamed on YouTube. So most of the content of the live stream will be the speakers speaking. If you would like to make a contribution, then obviously be aware that you will appear on the YouTube stream. If you want to change your name or turn off your camera, you know, like if you don't want to appear on the YouTube stream, but you would still like to ask a question or make a comment, then obviously feel free to do so.
I'll just say now, Simon, that if I don't last for the whole of the second session, it'll just be because it's getting on to well after midnight here, and I'm not.
Yes,
I'm not quite as energetic as I was a few years ago. So I'm going to try and stay to the end if I can, but I'm not sure how late we'll end up.
Yes,
so
I was
I'll
going to
just drop
say.
out when I can.
we have to give particular thanks to Sandra, who's joined us today, all the way from Australia, using the miracle of modern technology. But as you can imagine, the time difference is considerable. So we have to thank Sandra for staying up late to be able to give us her presentation today. So we'll just spend another couple of minutes letting in some more people before we start. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Simon Hanna. I'm on the steering committee of Anti-Capitalist Resistance, which is a new organisation organising socialists in England and Wales. We've run a series of meetings under the Critical University name, and the idea is to spend a bit more time having in-depth discussions around particular issues. They might be historical, they might be theoretical, they might be practical. Today's session of the Critical University is going to be on the Paris Commune, the past and present of the Paris Commune. So it's going to be two sessions today. The first session is going to be looking at the events of the Paris Commune itself, 150 years ago. What happened, who were the main people involved, what were the politics behind it, and so on. So the first session will focus on the actual historical event. The second session later this afternoon will focus on the lessons of the Paris Commune for today in terms of revolutionary strategy and so on. So the first session is kind of more historical. The second session is maybe more kind of theoretical or kind of practical. But as I said before, there's no brick wall between the two. Obviously, if you're talking about history, you're also talking about theory as well. So the first session we have today, we are very pleased to welcome Sandra Bloodworth, zooming all the way in from Australia. She is a Labour historian and a member of Socialist Alternative. She's the author of The Paris Commune, Glorious Harbinger of a New Society, and she's also the editor of Marxist Left Review. We're also joined by Paul Mason. He is a journalist and author of several books, including Post-Capitalism and Clear Bright Future, A Radical Defense of the Human Being. And he has produced a two-part documentary on the Paris Commune. So we will now turn over to, before we turn over to Sandra, I just want to make a quick comment about the situation in Palestine, because there are demonstrations happening today all over the world. There's a demonstration happening, there's several demonstrations happening in Britain as well. We thought that we'd go ahead with the Paris Commune event just because it's taken a while to get it organised, but we are in complete solidarity with the Palestinian cause. We are in complete solidarity with the cause of freedom for Palestinians. So we wanted to make that clear before the meeting started. So turning over now to Sandra, who is going to give us a presentation for about 20 minutes. Now, and that'll be followed by Paul. So Sandra, take it away.
Okay, I just have to share my slides and I need to make it a slideshow. Now, is that full screen for you, Simon?
No, not quite. It's still got the kind of the slides at the left-hand side.
It's got the, I'll have to go to another share.
We can still see, like the.
You can see the things down the side. Yeah. Hang on. I'll just click it again. Share again. Is that right now?
No, still the same.
Oh, what's happening to it? Does it matter if you can see can you see the slides well enough?
You can see the slides fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'll just start. I'll just have to work out which way I have to push them down. Oh, hang on. What's it saying to me? You are screen sharing. I can't work out how to make it go down the next slide. Oh, there, okay. I've worked out, do it from my mouse. Okay, well, I should start by acknowledging that I'm speaking on stolen land here in Australia and in solidarity with Palestine, but Australian land is stolen from the Aboriginal people, and we insist that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we stand with all the struggles of our Indigenous population against the ongoing genocidal oppression that they suffer. So, Marx wrote of the Commune, "This was the first revolution in which the working class was openly acknowledged as the only class capable of social initiative, even by the great bulk of the Paris middle class. Shopkeepers, tradesmen, merchants, the wealthy capitalists alone excepted." So let's begin with a sketch of the context and the space in which the uprising on the 18th of March exploded. And Paul is going to give more detail than my brief sketch. Belleville, side by side with Montmartre, where it all began, is described by Stuart Edwards in his documentary History of the Commune as the most solidly working class district in all of Paris, the most revolutionary. Now, Paris had been transformed by Baron Haussmann in the service of Napoleon Bonaparte. New wide boulevards cut swathes through workers' districts, destroying their homes. And the poor had crowded into Montmartre and Belleville, where they lived in appalling poverty and squalor, right beside the scenes of the wealthy's magnificent homes, their elegant stores and cafes, built over workers' demolished neighbourhoods. Now, a London Times correspondent described Montmartre as a rugged open spaces where the lawless crowds of these parts loved to hold their meetings and park their cannon. You can actually see them at the moment. Just 3 weeks ago, before 18th of March, hundreds of workers had helped the National Guard, a popular militia, move 250 cannon to defend them against the bombardment by Bismarck. So they moved them into Montmartre and Belleville. So this is the Montmartre lot. I think you can probably see my mouse. Now, Bonaparte had gone to war against Germany last July for the glory of France, and Bismarck's superior Prussian army had held Paris under siege from the 19th of September to the end of January. And of course, it was workers who made up the majority of about 60,000 people who died of cold and hunger. Now, Adolphe Thiers, head of the newly elected government, had moved his government and troops to Versailles, and Thiers was hated as the butcher who repressed the 1848 revolution. And now he had signed an armistice with Bismarck, which included an agreement between them that they would crush Red Paris. And on the 18th of March at dawn, sleepy workers emerging from their homes began to notice that Thiers' soldiers are there preparing to remove their cannon. Now, fortuitously, General Pinoy, displaying the general incompetence of his class, had forgotten to bring horses to move the cannon, and women began offering bread and wine to the underfed soldiers, asking, "Why are you stealing our cannon?" And women began offering bread and wine to the underfed soldiers, asking, oh, sorry, I've already said that, but the crowd swelling now, transforming itself from sleepy spectators to increasingly angry and active participants. An observer described the unfolding events as horses arrived. Women and children swarming up the hillside in a compact mass. The artillery tried in vain to fight their way through the crowd, but the waves of people engulfed everything, surging over the cannon mounts, over the ammunition wagons, under the wheels, under the horses' feet, paralysing the advance of the soldiers. And Louise Michel, who was leading some of this charge, later recalled these moments. Crowds like this are sometimes the vanguard of the ocean of humanity. But it was not death that awaited us as they had expected. No, it was the surprise of a popular victory. General Leconte 3 times orders the soldiers to fire on the crowd, and a woman challenges the soldiers. Are you going to fire on us, on our brothers, on our husbands, on our children? Leconte threatens to shoot any soldier who refuses to do just that. And as they hesitate, he asks, are you going to surrender to this scum? And a non-commissioned officer steps out from the ranks and calls out, turn your guns around and put your rifle butts up in the air. And the soldiers obey. Verdiger, that young officer, will later be shot for this action. But the revolution has begun. And an officer wrote about the experience that his soldiers had. We were stopped by a crowd of several hundred, principally children and women. The infantry detachment completely forgot their duty and dispersed into the crowd, succumbing to its perfidious seductions and ending by turning up their rifle butts. The London Times correspondent, returning from similar scenes around Belleville, visits this barricade in Montmartre where he had witnessed the laying of the first stone, and he comments it has now grown to considerable dimensions. Everyone who passes has to add a stone to the structure because they're being piled up from on the sides of the street for this purpose, mostly assembled by energetic children. New barricades were springing up in every direction, he writes. Instead of a government blocking every street, as was the case in the morning, a hostile cannon was now looking down every street. So we have just witnessed basically how revolutions happen. The attempted seizure of the cannon had been the breaking point, which had unleashed a well of bitterness fed by 2 decades of dictatorship, poverty, and the ravages of Bismarck's siege. And by midday, the grand building of Hotel de Ville, the Paris Town Hall, was seized by the National Guard. And if you just think about it, after one morning of rebellion, they now have the confidence to occupy this grand building at the heart of political power. And the Commune will create the most democratic institutions known to humanity at that time. The Universal Commune, they called it, a radical social innovation. The National Guard's leadership, unfortunately, lacking experience and confidence, lets the mostly conservative mayors in all the arrondissements set the rules for the election that they want to hold to set up a commune committee. And for one thing, they excluded women from the vote. But as we've already seen and will continue to see, this didn't prevent women from playing a leading role in all the activities of the commune. But also their democratic innovations were a historic step forward. All elected officials could be recalled at any time. And what's more, all kinds of civic officials like judges, magistrates, top public servants were to be elected on the same basis, and they would just receive a worker's wage. So the whole structure is fundamentally different from that of any of the most democratic capitalist states. Those elected will share the consequences of their own decisions with no sheltering behind privileges. And even enemies of the commune couldn't help but convey the joyous atmosphere which really is typical of all revolutions. One of them recorded their experience of standing in front of the Hotel de Ville while the names of those elected to the commune committee were read out 10 days later. I write these lines still full of emotion. 100,000 perhaps, armed men spilled out of every nearby street, and the sharp points of the bayonets glittering in the sun made the place seem like a field of lightning. The music playing with the Marseillaise, a song taken up in 50,000 resolute voices. This thunder shook all the people. An immense sea of banners, bayonets, and caps surging. The cannon still thundered, but they were heard only in intervals between the singing. Then all the sounds merged into a single cheer, the universal voice of the countless multitude, and all these people had but one heart, just as they had but one voice. The old state power had been demolished, and this for Marx was of momentous importance. Paris, he wrote, the central seat of the old governmental power and at the same time the social stronghold of the French working class, had risen in arms against Thiers. Paris had got rid of the army and replaced it by a national guard, the bulk of which consisted of working men. And the first decree of the Commune, therefore, was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people. And the structures they created were, Marx argued, the political form at last discovered under which to work out the economical emancipation of labour, which he had been thinking about for decades. Now, after the experience of taking matters into their own hands, the population enthusiastically joined in the debates and activities in dozens of radical clubs. So let me introduce you to some of the key, most radical figures with years of experience in workers' struggles and close to Marx in the Workers' International, known now as the First International. Elizabeth Dmitrieff was a Russian revolutionary who went to Paris at Marx's request, and she is still remembered in the centre of Paris. On April 11th, an appeal to the women citizens of Paris was posted on walls around the city and published in the newspapers of the Commune. Can you hear the cannons roar and the tocsin sound its sacred call? To arms! Is it the foreigner who has come to invade France? No, these enemies, these assassins of the people and of liberty are the French. This combat to the death is the final act in the eternal antagonism between right and might, between work and exploitation, between the people and their tyrants. Citoyenne, the gauntlet has been thrown. It is necessary to vanquish or to die. We must prepare to defend and avenge our brothers. So this signifies the launch by Elizabeth Dmitrieff of the Union des Femmes, and it became the largest and most effective organisation in the Commune, meeting daily in almost every one of the 20 arrondissements. There are at least 3,000 members, dominated by workers in the garment trades. And the Women's Union's discussions included theoretical questions about ending private property and the issues of gender-based inequality, as well as solving the day-to-day struggle to provide fuel and food to families. They participated in the defence of the Commune, maintenance of the barricades, tending to the sick and wounded. And in cooperation with the Commune Committee and its Labour Commission, they provided well-paid work under women's control. And the Labour Commission tried to organise as much work as they could under workers' control. Nathalie Lemel is still remembered in central Paris, another revolutionary with experience amongst workers and close to Marx, as was Benoit, oh, that's her, and then Benoit Malon. He helped set up an asylum for orphans where they could be offered basic instructions. And Nathalie Lemel was a bookbinder allied with Marx, but also worked closely with Dmitrieff in the Women's Union. Paul Mink opened one of the first schools for girls, and they requisitioned a Jesuit school because, having all the wealth of the church behind them, they were endowed with the most advanced equipment and laboratories. Now, there's so many reforms, we can't talk about them all in detail. I just want to list some of them, or what I think are some of the more significant. They abolished night work for bakers, which they had been campaigning for years. Edouard Vaillant set up a professional school of industrial art for girls, which introduced a new approach to teaching. Any skilled worker over the age of 40 could apply to become a professor. They introduced free education with no church interference for both boys and girls, and teachers' salaries were raised with equal pay for women and men. Secular nurseries were set up where nearby factories where there are a lot of female workers, and we get a bit of a glimpse of what some of the young children were being taught. A gentleman witnessed a band of 200 toddlers marching behind a drum and a small red flag. They sing at the top of their lungs, La Marseillaise. This grotesque parade celebrated the opening of a lay school organised by the Commune. The churches were taken over as meeting places for the clubs, the schools and other community activities, although most of them allowed mass and religious ceremonies in the mornings. And Le Sagre, member of the International and author of one of the first books published about the Commune, penned a description of one club meeting beneath the soaring ceilings and the beautiful stained glass windows. The revolution mounts the pulpits, almost hidden by the shadow of the vaults, hangs the figure of Christ draped in the popular oriflamme, which translated is sort of a scarlet banner that denotes the dignity and achievements of struggle. The organ and the people chant the Marseillaise. They discuss the events of the day, the means of defence. The members of the Commune Committee are severely censured and vigorous resolutions are voted to be presented to the Hotel de Ville the next day. And piles of tobacco in most places replaced the holy water. Statues of the Virgin Mary wore the fighter's uniform, red flag in hand, and often a cigar in her mouth, watching over calls for secular education for all and for women's liberation. Occupying these odes to privilege and power, of course, and under the actually made a huge impact on people, and under the influence of the radicals, workers embraced reforms well ahead of their times. Allowances for widows of men killed defending the Commune, whether they were officially married or not, and their children, whether legitimate and recognised by the church and state or not. At the urging of some of the clubs, the Commune endorsed the right to abortion. Any businesses whose owners had fled to Versailles were taken over where possible and put under workers' control. And significantly, even though they had suffered under Bismarck's siege, they were determinedly internationalist, inspiring support around Europe, including thousands at demonstrations in London. So the Jewish-Hungarian worker Leo Frankel, collaborator of Marx, was Commissioner of Labour. 2 Poles were given responsibility for organising defence of the Commune. And most famous of all, the skilled engineers and workers demolished this imperialistic Vendôme column bearing Bonaparte's statue. And the Place Vendôme, unharmed because of their careful planning, was renamed Place Internationale. Gustave Courbet, the renowned artist, who was persecuted for the rest of his life because he was accused of ordering the demolition, not that he admitted to it, established an artists' federation. And Eugène Protier, author of the Internationale, which today is like a hymn for the socialist movement, wrote its founding manifesto. The federation debated the role of the artist in society and how to overcome the counterposition between unity and utility, because they thought that everyone should have, everything in their lives should be beauty. It attracted well-known artists such as Corot, Manet, and Daumier, who scorned those who, such as Cézanne, Pissarro, and Degas, whose names you might want to remember at your next visit to the gallery, associated with the reactionaries in Versailles. And I always like to mention Napoleon Gaillard. He was sort of the epitome of their theories. He was a shoemaker and a member of the Artists' Federation. He considered bootmaking an art, which he wrote theses about in exile later. He was appointed commissioner for barricades, and this is him standing on the main one that he designed, to claim it as his artistic creation. Now, Marx commented, "What does this tremendous change prove to the bourgeois mind of all countries? Why, that the Commune has conspired against civilization, and the unbridled savagery that the capitalists unleashed at the end of May in the bloody week known as La Semaine Sanglante should be burnt into the consciousness of every anti-capitalist. Government troops massacred at least 30,000. About 38,000 were arrested and more than 7,000 deported. Thousands fled into exile. And in the last hours, Nathalie Lamel took command of a contingent of the Union des Femmes. They marched, red flag in the lead, to defend a barricade under fire." There, 120 women held back government troops for several hours. The legendary barricade, Le Sagre called it. One of the many who was shot was the dressmaker Blanche Lefebvre, an organiser of the Union des Femmes. Lamel cared for the wounded for hours. Her comrade, Elizabeth Dmitrieff, was at Montmartre with Louise Michel and Leo Frankel in the last hours. Women, men, and children chose to die bravely rather than surrender. Courage was their last revolutionary act. On the other hand, images of respectable women taking guided tours, holding their dainty handkerchiefs trimmed with lace made by women workers, to gloat at the suffering of these women thrown into filthy dungeons, taking particular pleasure in poking them with their expensive parasols. These images are a warning that the respectable middle classes, thought to be so cultured, revelled in the barbarity that was unleashed to restore them to their rightful privileged place. And much was made of women burning historic buildings, and they surely did, along with men and children, because fire was a weapon of defence, just as it was a weapon of attack by the reactionaries. And Marx defended it, and so should we. While tearing to pieces the living body of the proletariat, he wrote, its rulers must no longer expect to return triumphantly into the intact architecture of their abodes. The government of Versailles cries incendiarism. The bourgeoisie of the whole world, which looks complacently upon the wholesale massacre, is convulsed by horror at the desecration of brick and mortar. And socialists and anarchists have ever since celebrated the Commune, even in Broken Hill, a remote mining city here in Australia in the desert, celebrated the Commune during its years of industrial and socialist militancy into the 1920s. The Commune's bravery was celebrated as a symbol of resistance to the depravity of capitalism. And this plaque, where some of the many fell in the last hours, is still a mecca for radicals and leftists around the world whenever we visit Paris. So to finish, I just want to leave you with a few points. The Commune was not an example of socialism, but as Marx argued, it was a harbinger of that possibility. Living under siege and groping for the way forward, this first workers' revolution couldn't really achieve socialism in the time they had. But it showed the kind of democratic structures which are part of the dynamic of the collective struggles by the oppressed, especially when they're led by the working class, structures which can and should replace the capitalist state. Only revolutionary struggles can give rise to such creativity, collectivity, and radical reforms that we witnessed in the Commune. And it is such struggles which can make workers fit to found society anew, as Marx and Engels had actually written as young men in one of their first books. And I would argue belief in this possibility of self-emancipation. The soldier of the present revolution is of the people. Just yesterday, he was in his little shop, his chest bent down to his knees, plying his awl or his needle or hammering iron. How many people passed by without knowing, without believing that a man was there?
Thank you very much, Sandra. That was really great. That was excellent. A brilliant start. You know, people can use the reactions, clap, if they like to clap. Thank you very much. That was great. Okay, Paul, you are up next.
Can you just unshare your screen, Sandra? Yeah, great. So hi. Done? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm going to do a few slides, but I'll be in vision for a bit. So what I'm going to do is talk about the background to the class forces and the political forces that made the Commune happen. Because what I think the Marxist tradition is in general, because you read Marx, you read the Le Sagre book, You read the Comintern's various books about it, including Jelinek, which you can always get in a second-hand bookshop. The kind of brown paperback. They completely underestimate the extent to which this was a social revolution, and that the roots of the sociality of the revolution are to be found in the movement that created the commune. So, oh, you have to let me share my screen now, Simon. Hello,
Simon P. Could you make?
Yeah,
just done it.
Right, got it. So I'm gonna do the same thing first. I'm gonna just move it to the problem is with these, you can't go full screen without losing zoom. That's why it's always a screw up. But you can see the thing there, can't you? You can see the main slide, yeah? Okay, right. So if we examine the famous pictures, and there are tens of these online of the National Guard. Do this. If we examine the pictures of the National Guard on its barricades on the 18th and 19th, most of these photographs were taken on the 19th, the day after. You can see the Parisian working class as it saw itself, organized, hierarchical, male, and respectable. And if I'll just zoom in on a little detail of that photograph, taken in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, so right near the Bastille intersection. What you've got here are the skilled working class of Paris, organized in the National Guard, in a battalion that would have been both local to that area, and we know now, because of more recent research, that people crossed over from one battalion to another. And the best surmise of why they did that, why they traveled to be in another battalion with their friends, is that they were their workmates. So the National Guard battalions, for reasons I will come to, were the organized working class by the 18th of March, 1870. And you can see the role of women is incredibly gendered. So you see these two people in the middle, the mums or grandmas. You see the children pushed to the side. Everybody with a beard has been at war. They've got beards because they've been at war. This, you can imagine, during the British miners' strike, a very similar social kind of setup is what's on show there. But what I want to do is, what is missing is the other world. So what we're looking at here is, Sandra mentioned Montmartre. Montmartre was a recently built area that still had areas like this, which, as you can see, are very similar to a shantytown you might find if you went to Kenya or the Philippines. And they didn't pose for photographs because, as Sandra quite brilliantly brought to life, on the day itself, March the 18th, there was a mixture of two working classes on the streets. There were the kind of respectable people, and then there were people who lived here, and they were. There were two kinds of violence. There was an organized insurrection in response to the seizure of the cannons, and there was a quite disorganized insurrection coming from what everybody called jokingly la canaille, the scum, the shantytown dwellers. And I think a lot of the dynamic of the commune, in addition to the one which Sandra described, in which women come to the fore, the other dynamic is the emergence of unorganized workers, of children, and of course women out of these particular communities. Now, the timeline of how do we get to the commune? So a quick background. The 1848 revolution, which, if you're a Marxist, you should know about. It's the 18th. It leads to the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon. So basically, the revolution is crushed early on. The workers are massacred early on in Paris in 1848. By 1852, you've got the formation of the Second Empire. So Louis Napoleon had been elected president of France, but now he moved to crush both the left and the bourgeois liberal democratic parties. But Louis Napoleon's dictatorship, I would argue, was a little bit like that of Hu Jintao in am I on again? Yeah, I'm there. A little bit like, can you see me, people? Yeah. All right. It was a little bit like the Hu Jintao regime in China, in the sense that it wanted to be a modernizing kind of dictatorship. It wanted, technological modernity. It was, Louis Napoleon who, when the reactionaries chucked the impressionists out of the conservatory, Louis Napoleon said, no, you can still exhibit somewhere else. As Sandra pointed out, he bulldozed large parts of working class Paris and built these huge boulevards. And by the 1860s, by 1864, he was pretty desperate to try and incorporate the working class into the regime. And so there were strikes, and just like the Chinese bureaucracy, they wanted to detach the strikes from any possibility of revolutionary activity. So they legalized strikes, even though the First International, which had been formed in that year, 1864, was illegalized, and unions weren't technically legal. They could be mutual societies, they could be skilled workers mutual societies, but actual unions to organize that work were still illegal. So he legalizes strikes. What happens? Mass strikes break out. By 1868, there are tens of thousands of members of the First International. We'll come to the other political parties in a minute, but the International functioned very much like a proto Social Democratic Party. It linked to the work, to the unions and that dynamic. So by 1868, the next reform Louis Napoleon passes is he legalized public meetings, as long as they remained apolitical. Now, you can guess that, of course, they didn't remain apolitical at all. They were an amazing sort of movement. Let's think about working class politics at this time. So the public meeting movement from 1868 to 1870 held over 900 mass public meetings. There's an example of one. I'll come back to it. What are the politics happening in the public meeting movement? Going from left to right, we've got Proudhon. Proudhon was already dead, 1864, but his followers were the majority of the French labor movement and the Parisian labor movement in the mutual societies. Why? Because Proudhon's anarchism was basically no to the state, but we run society through mutual societies and cooperatives and associations of producers. It was quite a reformist form of anarchism, and especially as espoused by his main followers, who were skilled workers. So, though he said property is theft, effectively Proudhonism was a kind of reformist anarchism, and it was the kind of ideological default of Parisian workers. There were Marxists or followers of Marx within the International. And what were they focusing on? They saw trade unionism rather than cooperativism as the main thing. And of course, they had a vision of power, which was the opposite of Proudhon, in the sense that their vision of power was the legacy of 1848, the Democratic Republic and the Provisional Revolutionary Government, which they called the dictatorship of the proletariat. So a good example of a pro-Marx, I wouldn't say Marxist, person would be Eugène Varlin, the leader of the Bookbinders Union, and who worked with Nathalie Lemel, who Sandra mentioned, but he was very much under the influence of Marx by the time the Commune comes along. Much more important than Marx is Blanqui, Louis Auguste Blanqui. So he's the one in the middle. He was a veteran revolutionary, spent most of his life in jail. His followers were kind of proto-Leninists, in the sense that they were disciplined, militarized, underground, and basically had a concept of revolutionary communism with or without the working class. The fourth person in this picture is Gustave Flouron. who was an anthropologist and a scientist. But he, to me, represents what I call left republicanism, in the sense that he was also an aficionado of Marx. He met Marx. He fought in the Cretan War of Independence alongside the Garibaldi movement. And you find many Garibaldians in this group. What they are, they're petty bourgeois or bourgeois people who want a social republic. And they see a workers' revolution as the way to it. And their methodology, I mean, Blanky's working underground, you know, with his pistols and his bombs. Their methodology was more direct. They simply went to civil wars wherever they broke out. That's why two Polish generals, the Dąbrowskis, ended up, as she said, as Sandra said, leading the commune. The fifth person in here is Paul Mink, one of a group of feminists who were adjacent to the International. Now, what's the let me oh, I didn't share that, did I? Let me share that because it's important to see it. There they are, Marx, Proudhon, Marx, Blanqui, Gustave Flourens, and Paul Mink. That's the kind of 5 different tendencies that I think we're seeing inside the commune at the time, by the time it breaks out, and what is being discussed within the public meeting movement. Well, the differences are like this. The anarchists want cooperatives, kitchens, trade unions, a male monopoly of work against female work. The Marxists focused on trade unions, dictators of the proletariat, and fighting for women's right to work. The Proudhonists, armed revolution with or without the working class. Left Republicans, democratic republic, workers' rights, women's rights. And the feminists, women's right to work, property, education, and very importantly, and resonating strongly with working class women, the end to the criminalization of extramarital sex, because there was a morality police force which would raid a working class area, and anybody found sleeping together who weren't married, the woman would be registered as a prostitute, her head shaved and given a card, and effectively forced to become a sex worker, because sex work was legal. For the reactionary reason that working class men were supposed to sleep with sex workers so that they didn't, defile the virginity of working class young girls. That was the deal. Right, stop sharing the screen. So what's brilliant about this public meeting movement is that within it, my dog's going crazy behind me here. What's brilliant is that by the end of it, Varlam makes this famous comment, 8 months of meetings have basically converted the working class over to, well, quite close to Blanquism. So the Proudhonist workers have basically gone over to a mixture of Blanquism and proto-Marxism. So the women, the feminists won the debate about whether women should be allowed to work. And by the end of it, you're getting, even before the commune, you're getting working class women standing up and saying marriage should be abolished. We don't want any rights, as defined by our relationship to men. That you've got, you got the Blanquis standing up saying we need to impose communism on society. Right. So now what happens? As was referred to earlier, Louis Napoleon, increasingly desperate, faced by this revolutionary mass movement that's growing in Paris, first of all had a referendum to try and guess what, they're still doing that, to try and rubber stamp his legitimacy. And then he went to war with Germany. And so he's an empire. It's a 20-year-old reactionary empire in which the left is banned. The mistake he makes is he leads his own troops into battle, and in the 3rd of September 1870 gets captured. And they tried to actually hide from the Parisian workers, that indeed the Parisian press, that he'd been captured. But when it came out, what happened is obviously the people went onto the streets 4th of September 1870 and proclaimed a republic. So now you've got a bourgeois republic led by who? The reactionaries, the monarchists, but also the liberals. And they form a government of national defense. What happens then is that the French army's collapsed. So all you've got left in Paris are a few regular soldiers, some reserves called Garde Mobile, who are mainly peasants and reactionaries, and 250,000 workers who were called up into the National Guard. So the National Guard, like in America, had been a reactionary force in 1848, putting down the revolution. In 1870, the workers flood into it. And this is where it gets really interesting. I know I've got not much time, but let me try and cut to the chase. So the siege goes on. October, the first thing that happens is that in October, the Republican left, people like Fleuron, try and stage an uprising to try and gain control of the government of national defense, but it's put down. So the left goes underground. By January, it's clear that the siege is tightening. There's everybody starving, and the social tensions inside Paris are really acute. And so in January, a committee is formed of all 20 areas, the 20 arrondissements of Paris. Who's in it? Basically, all 5 tendencies I just described. It's kind of, in the beginning, led by left Republicans, journalists and petty bourgeois, but the International is there, the Proudhon is there, and also the Blanquistes are there. Only men can be in any of these committees. There were only men in the commune itself, in the elected commune. Right. So they issue a poster, the red poster, 1st of January, calling for, if you look at this bit, it's general requisitioning, free rations, so free food for everybody, and attack en masse. So they said the National Guard should launch a mass breakout against the Germans. The politics and strategy of the 4th September administration has been judged. Make way for the people, make way for the commune. So that's the call, 1st of January. What happens is that 22nd of January, the mass breakout takes place. The National Guard is sent to a stupid battle, gets massacred. The survivors come back. That's when they bring the guns and drag them up to Montmartre and Belleville, and the other big place was on the left bank, where there was also a workers' enclave there. And so 22nd of January, they try another attempt to seize the Hotel de Ville and fail. And the left again goes underground. 8th of Feb, right, what's happening? They've surrendered to the Germans. The new government, so the government calls a snap election. The snap election is overwhelmingly won, not even by supporters of Louis Napoleon, but by supporters of the actual old kings of France. So we've got the peasants, we've got the landowners, Catholic, monarchist reactionaries have a massive majority in the parliament. The liberals are shrunk down to about a quarter, and the left's got about 6% of the vote. So at this point, what's really important, and this all comes from a book by, where's it gone? Martin Philip Johnson, The Paradise of Association, which is one of my favorite books about the commune. What happened, the untold story that Marx and Lissaguet don't really tell, is that once they'd lost the election on the 9th of Feb, all these groups basically were now what they were organized in, what clubs, vigilance committees, which were food requisition and food bank type committees. The battalions, each battalion of the National Guard detached from the official HQ and formed a federation with a central committee. And so you've got the clubs, you've got the committees of the arrondissements, you've got the vigilance committees, and then you've got the central committee, plus you've got the Proudhonist organizations, you've got the International, you've got Blanquistes' underground movement. What happened is they all basically came together in an incredibly horizontal and networked form of organization called, wait for it, the Revolutionary Socialist Party. Revolutionary Socialist Party was intended to be an electoral vehicle for them in case there was another election. But what happened was that, first of all, the National Guard achieved a form of dual power days before March the 18th. The reason they went in on March the 18th was because they were losing control of Paris. There were raids on armories, there were raids everywhere by the revolutionaries. And then so the 18th of March crackdown, happens, and through it, there's a very clear prepared plan. So even though the kind of slum dwellers took part spontaneously, it was effectively the Central Committee of the National Guard, combined with the Revolutionary Socialist Party, combined with the Blanquistes, with their incredible, because they were mainly lawyers and doctors, the Blanquistes. They were well-organized people with money, and they seized power. Now, Sandra's told the story of what happened. I think the middle bit, this is my last bit, the middle bit of the commune is incredibly interesting for the following reason. Here we go, share that. Here is how I see that playing in to the way, what is real about what Marx says about it being a semi-state, about it being the form of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Right. There's three layers of power within the commune, and I've put in this chart what their relationship, how they match what they replaced in the Third Republic, which was only a few months old. So in the normal bourgeois state, there was a national assembly. Then there's the army, the police, the church, and the prisons, and then there's a massive bureaucracy, the civil service. Below them in Paris, there were mayors, and the mayors ran each of the 20 districts. Now, those mayors were kind of basically elected, but they'd never been elected by a free election. And then below them, there are voters, and voting's restricted to men. There wasn't universal suffrage at this point in France, okay, until the universal male suffrage of the first post-war the snap election. But if you compare that to the commune, first of all, the commune itself, which was like a city council, met in secret but took minutes. It was elected and recallable, and as a parliament, it could discuss anything it wanted to. And so it was taking constantly suggestions from the floor, from subcommissions like the Labour Subcommission or the Women's Subcommission or the Supply Subcommission. And some of the things that Sandra mentioned were legislated because they were immediately thrown onto the floor of the commune by people from below. So that's the first difference with a bourgeois parliament is there's no process of, how do you introduce a bill, a second reading? The Queen has to rubber stamp it. It was an immediate democracy. Secondly, the army was dissolved and replaced by the National Guard in its entirety. But the National Guard was, after the commune was formed, the National Guard technically expanded itself to every man in Paris. So every male adult in Paris was called up to the National Guard. Why is that important? Because it then means that the coercive force is the entire people. What is more, National Guards were paid wages because they got a loan from the Bank of France of £1 million effectively, and they were able to pay a form of UBI to every National Guards man. Finally, the civil service was replaced by basically communists going in and occupying the civil servants' offices. A few people stuck around. They even occupied the police bureau and basically they ran them as a quasi-bureaucracy, but it was pretty ineffective. Right, the second layer down, this is really important. And again, Martin Philip Johnson's brilliant on this. The arrondissements, they replaced the mayors with vigilance committees. So you've got 20, not 20, because the posh areas of Paris in the west of Paris didn't really take part. You've got 8 or 9 Soviet-style things, sort of bodies. But the most important thing is below that, because the revolutionary clubs, which met in churches or billiard halls or cafes and cabarets, anybody could go. And when the bourgeois journalists reported the horrors of the commune, that was what they were most horrified with, because these, although they had no formal relationship to the commune meeting in the city hall, they were basically a rolling mass meeting with women and children and teenagers and anybody standing up saying, I demand, the end of marriage. I demand we take hostages and burn every priest we can find and all this stuff, right? Then you had the formal vigilance committees, which were still distributing food. Then you had the battalion. Going back to my first, going back to my first picture, whichever battalion this was that did that barricade, you've got that battalion committee. And finally, going down, finally, you had the old revolutionary networks. They were still in session. And really importantly, and there's a huge amount of study been done on this. There's even more to do. The Women's Union for the Defense of Paris, because Dmitriev was in London and was sent by Marx to do this. She was sent as a 24-year-old woman to link up with the International in Paris. She arrives, and the first thing she does is she gets all the activists together and say, right, we'll set the Women's Union up. And officially it's for collecting money for soldiers and forming ambulances. It's quite gendered. But what does it become? It becomes the Women's Battalion in the last week. It becomes, and not just that, it becomes a kind of mass feminist organization, setting up workshops for women under women's control, etc. Demanding that sex workers be allowed to join the National Guard. All this because there was a big respectability issue. So finally, I think that's what makes it a social revolution. The depth of the power structures which replaced the bourgeois state for 2.5 months. And of course, for this reason, when they took control again, I think I've been studying fascism a lot for my book that I'm writing. I think that the reaction of the French state and the bourgeoisie of a mass murder killing up to 30,000 people in a city of 2 million. The Nazis actually did not massacre 30,000 people in a week much. You know what? They did in some places, but if you think about the Oradour massacre that the Nazis perpetrated in France, there's a few hundred victims. The French state killed 30,000 people in a week. And I think the reaction is very similar to what fascism is. They'd seen freedom and they said, right, we've got to, anybody involved has to be killed or deported. So the final slide I want to show you is just some of the work I've done inspired by the Commune, because the Commune is a living thing for the labor movement, and should always be. You could spend your life just studying it. Those like Sandra and the others who are going to speak later, it would reward a lifetime of study, academic or amateur, whichever you want to do. This is the play I wrote about Louise Michel and Nathalie Lemel during their exile on New Caledonia. I went to New Caledonia to research it, and I'm really, privileged to have been one of the few European leftists ever to go to New Caledonia. When I went into the archives, the last person who went there was Solveig Anspach, who made the film about Louise. There's nobody going. If you want to do a PhD, there's basically an archive of stuff on New Caledonia that's not being worked on by anybody, or not many people. So that's my play about Louise and her cohorts. And then I wrote this play about 2011 about the uprisings, in which basically I brought Louise Michel back as a ghost, the hauntology thing, and that was produced at Young Vic. And so yeah, that's it. For reference purposes, I've also just put the map up of where we're talking about. These working class areas are here: Montmartre, Belleville, Batignolles, where Varlin was the commander of the National Guard, and then down here, which is where the Blanquistes were really strong. Émile Duval was an iron worker, Blanquiste, got killed early on in the Commune fighting, but that's another place as well that we concentrate on. Right, stop sharing, shut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. That was brilliant. I'm going to give you a clap on the reactions there for that. Very good. Thank you. Okay, it's 1 o'clock, and we're due to finish the session around past. So obviously it'd be good to get the speakers to come in and just give some kind of closing remarks. So I'd say maybe we have around 20 minutes for questions and contributions. There is a second session starting at 2 o'clock. So if you feel that there's something urgent that you didn't manage to say in this session, then then there is time later on in the afternoon to contribute. So if people would like to say something, ask a question, make a comment, then please put their hands up. I've seen Lee's put his hand up. Before I take Lee, though, there was a question in the chat from Dan Jeffrey, who asked, I would like to ask if we could know more about the international reaction, were there strikes, direct action, etc., and reaction in the rest of France. Was there any realistic chance of the revolution in Paris spreading? So that's one question for you to think about. Lee, you can go first. If you'd like to try and keep it to 2 or 3 minutes, I know that's not long, but just in case other people want to speak as well.
No worries, I won't waffle on. Thank you both presenters. My question, kind of comment, is this was like kind of proto socialist with a bit of feminist state. How interesting would it be to compare, and I suggest this to anti-capitalist resistance, maybe you could get someone to speak about this, is Rojava, which was a much more developed and functioning ecological feminist state, according to Graeber and other people who've actually worked and lived in Rojava, if I'm pronouncing it right, which was then kind of undone by Trump's decision to let Turkey invade. That's my question, kind of comment. If anyone can come back on that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee. That's a good question. We will, although the speakers obviously, if they want to come back, on that, that's fine. We will be discussing sort of modern examples of the commune in the second session as well. So maybe it will sort of cross over a bit. Does anyone have any other questions or kind of short points they'd like to make? Anyone at all? I think the talks were so comprehensive that I think you already answered all of the.
You've got Dave.
Here we go. I knew that would prompt some hands. Okay, Rowan, you're next, and then Penelope. So it's just.
Thank you. Also, Dave Cope is trying to sort of signal on the video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Excellent talks, and as Sam says, like I had a question in mind, and then a lot of it was covered in the sort of extensive discussions anyway. But I just sort of want to raise a point that was sort of covered, but maybe can be extended in terms of, and I think Paul sort of developed this quite extensively. Paul Mason developed this quite extensively. The idea of the progression in struggle during the course of events and how that interacts with left pessimism today, a kind of pessimism about sort of where people are relative to where they can be, and tethering our politics to taking people as they are in a very reified and very ahistorical and static notion. One of the things that Paul mentioned quite extensively is the sort of groundwork that already sort of pre-existed the commune in terms of ideological forces there. So it'd be interesting to sort of think about and to hear about the degree to which people had already been radicalized and the degree to which the process of struggle radicalized them. And what that says today about the work we need to do in terms of taking people often with reactionary views or unfought politics and seeing them transform into people who, you know, want a generalized liberation of all society. So yeah, just an open question about sort of what are the lessons in terms of revolutionary hope and change through struggle that we can develop today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. Penelope, you're next, then Dave.
Yes, hello. So speaking to you from Paris, where unfortunately demonstrations in solidarity with Palestine have been banned. And so I'm a little distracted by checking on the fate of my comrades who are among those maintaining those demonstrations from some political organizations and trade unions. But actually, the point I wanted to make, because I will be speaking later, was I would rather take issue with the emphasis that Paul gave to how gendered the women's union was. I mean, first of all, we have to remember that from the outset, it was the Women's Union for the Defense of Paris and for aid to the wounded. And in what she wrote on the 12th of April, when she called for the first meeting of the Women's Union in the town hall in the 20th arrondissement where I am, Elizabeth Dmitrieff said, sorry, I'm translating directly from the French. So citizens, women citizens, citizenesses, whatever you want to say, all determined, all united. Let us look to the safety of our cause, to the doors of Paris, to the gates of Paris, on the barricades. If the arms and the bayonets are all used by our brothers, the paving stones remain for us. In other words, from the beginning, it was clear, and also in the very first statutes or whatever it was of the Women's Union, there was talk of the money to buy petrol and to buy bullets. So from the beginning, it was clear that the Women's Union saw itself as part of the cause of defending Paris militarily against the Versaillais and the Prussians. And women did fight. It's true that it was not. I mean, the National Guard was a masculine thing, but women were in the battalions of the National Guard. There were, I mean, Louise Michel, but Victorine Brochet wrote memoirs about how she had fought in a battalion of the National Guard, and there are many others. There's the famous barricade at Place Blanche that was kept by women, but women fought on the other barricades. And here in the East, which was, you know, just up the road from me, the last stand of the Commune and so forth. And okay, the set piece photographs by the photographer whose name I forget, but there was a documentary about him on the French television just a few days ago. Okay, so they show women, you know, wearing aprons and so on, but women didn't necessarily change what they wore because of what they were doing. I mean, there were some who were well known for wearing masculine dress and so on, but not necessarily. And also the women and children and so on who went to guard to keep their cannons on Montmartre were from the canaille. So also this distinction that was made, I'm not particularly convinced by, because it's certainly not something that's brought out by French historians in writing about this, but certainly it, you know, the scum, as they were called by the Versaillais. I mean, you know, all the insults and all the obviously anti-misogynist insults directed at women. I mean, they all came from the Versaillais press. But I mean, it was ordinary people. I'm not very convinced by that distinction of respectable working class and those who lived in, you know, in the conditions that were shown. So it was just.
Thank you, Penelope. Dave, you're next, then Jude.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll try and be brief. I've got loads of things I'd love to say. On the very last point, I think Paul was referring to the number of young kids, lads, in many cases, who suddenly became involved. And that's true. They served as paper sellers for Le Père Duchesne and the Cri du Peuple by Jules Vallès. And they actually made money for the family by doing that. They could make 4 francs, you know, in a week doing that, which was a huge amount. Paul, I loved your enthusiasm for the Commune. You had to rush it, and there's loads of things I'd like to have gone into detail. the description of the Blanquists as proto-Leninists, I think, is absolutely right. But they were also deeply embedded in the IWMA. There was this fluidity between these organizations at the time that is amazing to, I think, to people on the left today. There was a sectarianism, but the real desire to work together. I think when you talked about the Revolutionary Socialist Party, I think there's a slight danger of thinking they actually set up an organization of that name, which they didn't. It's like the Marx and the Communist Party, the manifesto of the Communist Party. There's no Communist Party. We just meant the group of people who were communists. And I think in the Commune, it was people who called themselves Revolutionary Socialists, which was, you know, a very early use of the word, and it didn't come up in England, you know, until the 1880s. They were way ahead of us there. In your description of feminism, one of the points you missed out on the list was the anti-clericalism, which is a really deep-rooted movement amongst women and also men. Dictatorship of the proletariat was never talked about at the time. That concept came later, but the evidence from the Commune was used as a basis for it. I think in your description of the forces, I'd have had a section on the Jacobins, the people who really defined their politics by reference to the first French Revolution, especially the revolutionary period 1792, 1793. Delescluze was the purest example of that, a heroic older member of the Commune who at the end committed suicide through despair. He didn't want, you know, he'd lived through everything and he knew defeat was inevitable, and he just walked onto a barricade till he was torn to pieces. And in fact, I was just reading the other day that the French government in 1874 issued a statement saying that Delescluze was being sentenced to death in his absence, even though it was a well-known fact that he'd actually been shot on a barricade. It just shows, you know, the sort of fear of the ruling class about the Commune. Was it a failure? Somebody was asking, was it inevitably a failure? And I think it was bound to fail. It didn't have support of the rest of the country, though there were communes set up in very short periods in Marseille and Lyon, Limoges, and so on. But they were generally more Republican than socialist. But you know, there's a whole study to be done there as well, and on Britain. And I've read a lot about the links with Britain, and there's one thesis in Sussex University by Paul Martinez that I would really recommend if anyone wants to know anything about the depth of the links between Britain, and that's Britons who were in Paris and exiles who came to Britain. I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. It was great. Thank you. Jude, you're up next.
Thanks, and thank you to both speakers for really interesting and engaging kind of explorations of the history here. All of the comments and questions that have preceded mine are enormous, and therefore recognizing that there is a very small amount of time, mine is going to be very small in comparison, which is to say that we have heard a lot from the speakers so far about the role of feminist and women's movement organizations, and the kind of mobilization around questions of sex work and sex workers' rights had been mentioned as part of that. But I am interested to know how much is known about the active participation and mobilization of sex workers themselves in the struggle. So what kind of records, are there records that exist of sex workers' self-organization in their own voices? What do we know of what sex workers had to say about the role that they were being cast in this conversation? Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. We've got time for another couple of contributions if anyone wants to make any. Paul and Sandra, I know it's a big ask, but you probably have to come back for like 5 or 6 minutes or something like that each, if that's okay. Well, no one else has put up their hand, so let's take the speakers back now. As I said, there is another session starting at 2 o'clock. Gilbert Ashkar and Penelope Duggan will be in conversation with me about the kind of revolutionary tradition of the Paris Commune and what it means today. So looking at you know, kind of different urban uprisings and revolts that have happened, which have taken on a more commune model. So that's going to be the session this afternoon, starting at 2 o'clock. So I'll take the speakers from the first session back now, just as a quick reminder of some of the questions that were asked. So there was a question about could it have spread, or, you know, people mentioned there was proto-communes in other places, but could it have spread more across France? And if not, why not? The question was asked about Rojava and the kind of model there, and whether there's any kind of similarities. There was also a question asked about sort of revolutionary optimism, or sort of how, you know, the potential for emancipatory struggle can emerge. And there was a specific question also at the end about the role of sex workers in the commune. So those were the main questions, and obviously if you want to make any closing remarks, then please do so. So I'll take the speakers in reverse order from the first session, if that's okay. Paul, is that okay if you go first, and then we'll finish with Sandra?
Yeah, I don't think I disagree. I may have misspoken the way I was describing the Women's Union. I don't disagree that they took a full part in the fighting, and indeed the organisation was very clear from the meeting of the Women's Union in the 4th arrondissement, and they marched to the Place Blanche barricade. I think I would try and stick by my view that there was a kind of labour aristocratic, respectable, male-dominated Proudhonism, and then it fell apart under the impact of being impacted with the wider working class. And I've got this quote, which is a well-known quote from one of the Blanquistes, Gaston da Costa. No, he was a law student who was a second in command of the repression during the Commune. But he basically, I think I won't bother quoting it all now. Well, I've got it here. Yeah, on the March the 18th, Gaston da Costa is a Blanquiste, is a revolutionary, and he did 10+ years in hard labour afterwards. But this is how he described the first day. Prostitutes, registered or not, came from the quarter of Montmartre, out of hotels, cafes and brothels, on the arms of aligned soldiers, accompanied by a legion of pimps. They surged out, the pathetic spume of prostitution, upon the revolutionary wave. So if there's a revolutionary saying that about the women of the La Canaille, I think it just captures that tension. That's all I'll go so far. On the question of, I don't know, I haven't been to Rojava, so I can't tell. But the point is about all these liberated spaces. They all often are accidental. But what's so inspiring about 200 years, indeed, of working class resistance is that whenever there is a liberated space, it often looks very similar to the Commune. You know, Barcelona in 1936-37, Madrid in 1936, the Warsaw Ghetto. You know, not liberated, but in a way during its struggle for liberation, had some of the features that we see in the Commune. Besieged working class communities. How female sex workers organised, I don't know. All I know is that during the deportation to New Caledonia, there were, you know, women who went with their husbands who'd been deported, and there were women revolutionaries, and they were really into two categories. I've got the list of I think it's 45 women who were treated as revolutionaries in their own right. And they're a mixture of respectable sort of middle-aged women who'd led barricade fighting or led hostage taking. Josephine Marchais is one of the most famous. But then some of the others lower down the list are young women against who it says, you know, prostitute or whatever. So they've clearly been defined. That's all I know. In terms of what does it say about revolutionary subjectivity and how do we combat passivity and depression? I think this is really important because what the Commune does show that people change their minds in struggle, and that given liberation, they want everything to be liberated at once. You know, there was no stagism. There was very little economism among the commune activists. You know, the famous account of the woman saying, you know, end marriage. You know, in standing up and saying, end the institution of marriage, burn the faces of the priests, shoot every priest. This is liberation happening in real time. And I think what's so depressing about today's reformism is that the adaptation to working class consciousness as it is doesn't take account of the fact that it can change in struggle. Many of these workers only enter the struggle for a city council. Varlan himself said, this is not the international revolution, it's just the struggle for a city council. And it spirals out of control from there on in. On the Revolutionary Socialist Party, I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's really interesting that in February, there were meetings of vigilance committees which were minuted, and I'll just quote from you, every quote from the minutes. Every member of a vigilance committee declares allegiance to the Revolutionary Socialist Party. In consequence, he demands, by all possible means, the suppression of the privileges of the bourgeoisie, its downfall as a directing class, and the political advent of the workers. In a word, social equality. No more bosses, no more proletariat, no more classes. He recognizes work as the only foundation of the social constitution, work of which the entire product should go to the worker. I mean, maybe and indeed, the words Revolutionary Socialist Party have capital letters. So yes, I agree. It wasn't the closest to a party were the Blanquists, the closest to Leninism were the Blanquists. But yes, but it's interesting that that's there. And of course, it didn't last long enough, because during the final point, and Sandra made this point, to say we haven't discussed, the commune split over the question of revolutionary repression, with the Marxists in general going into a minority against the formation of a dictatorial committee called the Committee of Public Safety. And the Blanquists and the revolutionary Republicans generally favouring repression. The Marxists were the minority. But we've got no time to talk about that. I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. Sandra, do you want to?
Yes, I really enjoyed Paul's introduction. It sort of emphasised how when I was preparing my article that's going to be in the book, I had taken on the project to do, and I wanted to do a lot of the kind of research that Paul had, but unfortunately I was sick most of the time I had to do it. So the article is a rather like truncated version of what I would have liked to have done, but it probably would have taken a book anyway. See, I sort of had some sympathy with what Penny said from the impression that Paul gave in his introduction, but when you came back, I thought you changed slightly the emphasis. But the point I'd make is a little bit different in a way, that we have to expect that the working class, like the working class is gendered by capitalists. It still is, you know, like for all the integration of women into the trade union movement and the working class more generally, and some of the more active unions here in Australia in the last few years have been where women are concentrated. But it's quite clear you have women in dominated industries, you have industries where men dominate, and there's the pay differentials, all kinds of things. And so that keeps alive some of the stereotypes. But on the other hand, I think we have to be careful not to expect 150 years ago for people to have very similar ideas to anything much we think today. Like we've been through the suffragette movement, we've been through you know, lots of revolutions where workers have advanced beyond what the Paris Commune achieved, and we've had the modern women's movement that completely threw up in the air everything about the way people felt that women's, you know, it wasn't just a question of women's rights. We started talking about women's liberation and taking up the issues of sexuality and the repression of that everyone experiences of their sexuality and stuff. So, which was quite different, which is, again, it flows from the developments that economic and social, which had taken place under capitalism, that women do have more options, you know, with the better working conditions, more integrated into the working class, having fewer children because of access to contraception, all kinds of aspects of our lives that made it possible for a different view of women. And so, but even so, historically, I feel it's important to be able to show both for the time and what it tells us today, because the working class remains gendered and the stereotypes about the roles of women and men just continue. They're so difficult to, you know, even whittle away very much. It's important to show that even where women weren't as integrated into the everyday life of the organised working class, when things happen, they come to the fore. And I've written quite a lot about this in Australia, the Broken Hill mining town that I talked about. It was a male workforce in the mines, and yet women were involved in every major surge of militancy. And not just some feminists dismiss it as, oh, they were just an auxiliary of some sort, but they weren't. They were part of the struggle, and it was consciously argued by people like Tom Mann, who came out from Britain, the socialists in the around the place, that, you know, women had a political role. They weren't just seen as just carrying out their own gendered roles. Often they were the most militant on the picket lines. And so that we need to be able to show that that's happened historically, even when the situation was less favourable. But it still plays a role today, I think, in challenging the stereotypes that, you know, people sink back into, because when there's not a high level of struggle, all the, like in the, here, you know, here in Australia in particular, because we've had such a low level of struggle, we've had a terrible role played by the Labor Party since the early 80s, that class collaboration has just destroyed the unions. And so there's so little understanding of class consciousness or anything like that. And so, of course, the right made ideological gains again. And even though we won equal marriage for, you know, all genders, it's being whittled away by defending religious rights, you know, and they're getting away with it because there's no ability to fight back. Anyway, I've gone on a bit too long about that. But that is related to the question which most interests me in a way, is the thing about the revolutionary optimism and, you know, how do people radicalize? Well, obviously, there can be, the left can play a role in the times when there isn't a, you know, the revolutionary kinds of struggles. And I particularly mentioned that the people I highlighted were people who had been active in workers' struggles, and they had drawn lessons themselves. The workers with them had drawn lessons. There had been lessons drawn in some of the French strikes about the role of women. And so the Proudhonist ideas were already being challenged before there was stuff that Nathalie Lamel was involved in. But we have to just keep at the forefront of our mind, I think, to try to not sink into pessimism, is that capitalism creates revolutionary situations. And, you know, there's so many aspects today that you would have to think the crisis of the system is not going to go away. Here in Australia, we're very conscious of the Cold War developing against China. That is raising all kinds of issues. And, you know, there's a whole history of anti-militarism in Australia, which may be different when it comes to the question of China, because it intersects with the issue of racism, the history here and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, you never know what will be the issue. That who could have known that just trying to take back the cannon would be what began the revolution? So I think all we can say as socialists is that we have to be the people who are the most enthusiastic for every tiny little flicker of struggle, even if it starts in ways that we don't think are that productive. And we have to try to intervene to, you know, argue for the things we think will take the struggle forward more, and relate to the level of the changes that can take place quite radically. And to be honest, I think the new situation in Palestine is such an opportunity. Like here in Australia, it's the biggest rally we've had for ages. other than Aboriginal rights, which are not all that radical at the moment, where there's a new young layer of activists, and I've been reading about in Palestine itself, new young layer of activists have organised the resistance, and Hamas is trying to say that they're part of it by lobbing their rockets, but really they're not leading it and they didn't begin it. And so we have to hope that those of us who are active around the world can help some of those young new activists not just go down some more radical version of the road of Hamas and the PLO and everyone else, but to see the issues as a more of a, you know, the solutions being to try to develop a whole consciousness of the role of the working class across the Middle East and around the world in their support to put the West under pressure and the Arab regimes, that the situation can't go on the way it is, and begin, you know, there's a possibility that a whole new generation of revolutionaries may come out of it. And here in Australia, we have a huge Arab population, which again and again, every time this happens, we hope this will happen. But, you know, every time there's a few steps forward taken, and we want to treasure those and be the ones who do relate to the possibilities for people to change in the way we saw in the commune. And that's why I sort of tried to emphasize some of that, because, but I really like the way Paul pointed out, you know, how the sort of the most disorganized workers actually leapt to the fore in some ways. Well, there's so many other things we could say, but I think I'll try and stop with revolutionary optimism. And thank you for having me. I wasn't really sure how I got on the list, but it's great to intersect with people on the other side of the world. And I'm going to try and stay up for the last session. It's not that late yet, it's only 10:30.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much to our speakers in the first session. That was Sandra Bloodworth, zooming in all the way from Australia. Thank you for staying up for us, Sandra. And also Paul, zooming in all the way from South London, so a bit more local. Thank you very much for your contribution. That was very good. First session, we're going to have a break now for half an hour. I know in the Paris Commune, workers went down and shot out all the clock towers because they were fed up with the bells and the clocks kind of dictating their kind of working lives and everything. But unfortunately, we are still being determined by time. So we're going to have a half an hour break, and we're going to come back at 2 o'clock for a second session focusing on the Paris Commune today. So looking at some of the revolutionary traditions or lessons of the Paris Commune in terms of more contemporary struggles. That will be with Penelope Duggan and Gilbert Ashkar as well. So please, so you can stay logged in if you want, or you can log off and come back in, but we'll be starting at